What if Nazi Germany had found a way to bomb the United States during World War II? At the time, the Atlantic Ocean seemed like an impenetrable barrier protecting American cities. While Europe and Asia were being devastated by air raids, the American mainland remained far from the destruction of the war. But inside Germany, engineers and military planners were already working on something extraordinary: an aircraft capable of crossing the Atlantic, striking targets inside the United States, and returning to Europe. Some of these designs were real. Some prototypes even flew. And one of the most radical concepts imagined a bomber that could travel to the edge of space before attacking North America. So the question is, how close did Nazi Germany actually come to bringing the war to American skies? During the Second World War, the United States carried out massive bombing campaigns across Europe and Japan. American aircraft flew thousands of missions, destroying factories, railways, and entire cities. But few people realize that, at one point in the war, Nazi Germany imagined doing the exact opposite: not attacking American ships in the Atlantic, not fighting American soldiers in Europe, but striking the United States itself. German leaders and engineers considered the possibility of bombing American cities directly from across the Atlantic Ocean. Targets like New York, Washington, or major industrial centers were discussed in strategic conversations. It sounds almost unbelievable, but for a brief moment during the war, German engineers believed that such a mission might actually be possible. When the war began in 1939, Germany possessed one of the most formidable air forces in the world, the Luftwaffe. Its aircraft had been designed for rapid and aggressive warfare across Europe. German bombers and fighters supported fast-moving ground forces and were extremely effective in the early years of the war. They could strike Poland, France, the Low Countries, and later the Soviet Union. German aircraft were also used heavily during the air campaign against Britain. However, despite this impressive power, German aviation had a fundamental limitation that would become increasingly important as the war expanded. That limitation was range. German bombers were designed for continental warfare, meaning they could operate across Europe but not across oceans. Most of them could fly hundreds or sometimes a few thousand kilometers, which was sufficient for European battlefields, but nowhere near enough to reach North America. This limitation became a major strategic problem once the United States entered the war. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the United States joined the conflict fully. Soon afterward, Germany declared war on the United States as well. Suddenly, the world's largest industrial power had become an active enemy of Nazi Germany. American factories began producing enormous numbers of aircraft, tanks, ships, and weapons. These factories were located far from the main battlefields, safely protected by the Atlantic Ocean. For German leaders, this situation was extremely frustrating. The United States could support the Allied war effort with vast industrial production, yet Germany had no realistic way to strike the American homeland. While American and British bombers increasingly targeted German cities and industries, Germany had no equivalent capability to retaliate against the United States itself. The idea of somehow reaching America began to grow inside German strategic thinking. In response to this problem, German authorities launched a highly ambitious program in 1942 that later became known as the Amerika Bomber. The concept behind the project was bold and technically challenging. German engineers were asked to design an aircraft capable of flying from occupied Europe, crossing the entire Atlantic Ocean, carrying a meaningful bomb load, striking targets inside the United States, and then returning safely to its base in Europe. To accomplish this mission, the aircraft would need an operational range of roughly 12,000 kilometers, which was far beyond the capabilities of most bombers at the time. The project attracted several major German aircraft manufacturers, each attempting to design an aircraft capable of achieving such an extraordinary mission. One of the most notable designs to emerge from this program was the Messerschmitt Me 264. This aircraft represented a dramatic departure from earlier German bombers. It was significantly larger, with a massive wingspan designed to support long-distance flight. The aircraft used multiple powerful engines and was built specifically with intercontinental missions in mind. In theory, a bomber like the Me 264 could take off from airfields in western France, fly across the Atlantic Ocean, reach the eastern coast of the United States, drop bombs on major cities or industrial targets, and then return to Europe. For German planners, this possibility was both strategically attractive and symbolically powerful. The idea that German aircraft might appear over American cities carried enormous psychological implications. Several prototypes of the Me 264 were actually constructed, and at least one prototype completed test flights. For German engineers, these early tests provided a degree of proof that the concept might work in principle. However, the aircraft faced serious technical challenges. Long-range aircraft required extremely reliable engines, large quantities of fuel, and advanced materials. Germany's wartime industry was already stretched thin by the demands of ongoing military production. As the war progressed, these challenges became even more severe. Despite the technical promise of the design, turning it into a fully operational strategic bomber would have required resources that Germany increasingly lacked. At the same time that the Amerika Bomber program was being developed, some German scientists and engineers began thinking even more radically about how to reach the United States. One of the most unusual concepts was known as the Silbervogel, which translates to silver bird. This design was unlike any conventional aircraft of the time. Instead of flying across the Atlantic in a traditional manner, the silver bird was intended to launch using rocket propulsion, climb to the edge of space, and then glide along the upper layers of the atmosphere at extremely high speeds. The aircraft would effectively skip across the atmosphere in long arcs, allowing it to travel enormous distances in a relatively short time. In theory, this would enable a bomber to reach North America far faster than traditional aircraft could manage. The concept behind the Silver Bird was revolutionary, but it also required technology that did not yet exist. The engineering challenges were enormous. Materials capable of withstanding the heat generated during such flight were not yet available, and the propulsion systems required for the design were far beyond what Germany could realistically produce during the war. As a result, the project remained purely theoretical. It never moved beyond early studies and conceptual designs. Nevertheless, the existence of such ideas illustrates just how far German engineers were willing to push the boundaries of technology in an attempt to overcome the strategic barrier created by the Atlantic Ocean. While these ambitious projects were being explored, the broader situation of the war was changing rapidly. By 1943 and 1944, Germany was increasingly on the defensive. Allied bombing campaigns began systematically targeting German industrial centers, transportation networks, and fuel production facilities. Cities across Germany experienced devastating air raids. Factories were destroyed, infrastructure was disrupted, and the German war economy struggled to maintain production. Under these conditions, investing heavily in experimental long-range bombers became far less practical. Germany's military leadership increasingly focused on defensive technologies and weapons that could be deployed quickly to respond to immediate threats. At the same time, the United States was expanding its own aviation capabilities at an extraordinary pace. American industry produced thousands of aircraft every year, including advanced long-range bombers such as the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. This aircraft represented one of the most advanced bombers of the entire war and was capable of extremely long missions across the Pacific Ocean. While Germany struggled to maintain its existing industrial capacity, the United States was scaling up production to levels unmatched by any other nation involved in the conflict. The gap in industrial power between the two sides became increasingly obvious as the war progressed. Eventually, the Amerika Bomber project quietly faded away. Resources were redirected toward other programs, and Germany's worsening military situation made the development of intercontinental bombers unrealistic. In the end, Nazi Germany never succeeded in creating an operational aircraft capable of striking the American mainland. The Atlantic Ocean remained a powerful natural barrier throughout the war. American cities, unlike many European and Asian cities, were never subjected to sustained bombing campaigns during the conflict. This geographic distance provided the United States with a significant strategic advantage, allowing its industrial production to continue largely undisturbed. Even though the plan never became reality, the idea of German bombers attacking the United States remains one of the most fascinating what-if scenarios of the Second World War. For a brief period, German engineers and strategists genuinely believed that technology might allow them to overcome the vast distance separating Europe and North America. If the war had lasted longer, or if Germany had possessed greater industrial resources, the development of such aircraft might have progressed further. History ultimately took a different path, but the existence of these projects reveals how global the ambitions of the war had become. The Second World War was not only a conflict fought on battlefields and oceans, it was also a competition of technology, industry, and strategic imagination. Plans like the Amerika Bomber and concepts like the Silverbird show that engineers on all sides were constantly searching for new ways to overcome geographic and technological limitations. In the end, Germany never brought the war to American skies, but the attempt itself remains a remarkable example of how far wartime innovation could reach. If you enjoy exploring lesser-known plans, secret weapons, and strategic ideas from history, consider liking and subscribing for more deep dives into the events that shaped the modern world. See you soon!